All right, so lesson 100 is about graphing parabolas. Let's recall that a parabola is going to look like a U or an upside down U up here in green, right? It's going to be completely symmetrical, meaning I could fold it in half long ways and it's going to land, it's going to cover each other. So it's completely symmetrical. Okay, the formula or form for a parabola is y equals a parentheses, x minus h, close parentheses, squared plus k. The minus is part of the formula. It's very important. So if you see in your problem that there's a positive there, then we have to think of how do we get a negative into a positive or a positive into a negative. Well, that happens when I have two negatives next to each other, right? Two negatives next to each other equals a positive. So we're going to have to sometimes manipulate our H look in order to force it into this formula, because that's what we're going to, that's how we tell how to graph it. Okay. So we're going to use completing the square to get this into proper form. So that's kind of our technique. The A is going to give us direction. So that tells us if it's going to open up. If it opens up like this, like a regular U, that's going to be a positive A. If it opens down, that's a negative A. The vertex is always HK, and it's in this form, so it must have a negative, and I just use the positive form of H. So if it says minus 3, my H is going to be 3, plus, and then whatever K is. And then the axis of symmetry, like I was talking about that line that cuts this parabola in half, is always going to be x equals h. Okay, so x equals, 2 or whatever that number h will be. Okay, so that's kind of the beginning part. Make sure all this is in your notes. And we're going to start doing some examples. Okay, so the first example that I have right here, make sure. Okay, so yeah, it's just A in your practice. Okay, so it starts in the purple here. Okay, and I'm gonna cover this just to get our eyeballs ready to what we're doing. Okay, so we start in purple, and we know the first thing we need to do is complete the square. So we're gonna do what we normally do and get our x's together. We're going to keep our 3, our constant, out to the side. Okay. Then when we complete our square, okay, we're going to take our negative 2, divide it by 2. So we're going to get negative 1 and then square it. You're so good, all of you, at completing the square. I know you're following me right now. So we square it to positive 1. Now here's something a little different. Normally when we're doing these, we have this part on the left side, and then we have the constants on the right side. And so when we add a negative 1 over here, we add a negative 1 over there to keep it balanced. But now we have it in a little bit different form. So when we add our negative 1 over here to keep it balanced, we have to subtract a 1 because it's on the same side of this equation. So we add 1 and then quickly subtract 1 and then add the 3, which we had. Okay, that's different. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to get y equals x minus 1 quantity squared plus 2. So that's completing the square, and you guys are really, really good at that. Okay, so I'm going to put this up here so I can reference it, and then here's the next part. Okay, and this is new, all right? So we have our vertex. Remember I told you it's HK. And then here's the equation and I'll cover it one more time just so we don't have to look at so much stuff. Okay, so HK. So remember I told you that HK is my vertex. Well, x minus h is part of the formula. So 1 is my x value of the vertex, and 2 is my y value of the vertex. And it's not negative 1 because negative is part of the equation. So we assume negative is part of the equation, so it's whatever number is with the negative. So it's just 1. The axis of symmetry, I told you, was x equals h. Again, because the negative is part of the equation or formula, it's just x equals 1. All right, now we're going to go to graph this. Okay, so we're going to focus right now on the green. So I drew my graph. The vertex is 1, 2. So I go over 1 up 2. Now I notice from the equation, look at the number that's before the parentheses. I don't see a number there, so we understand it's a positive 1. When it's positive, I told you that the graph goes upwards, right? So we know that the direction's going to be going up. Now we have to come up with 2 other points so that we have kind of a good estimation of what this graph looks like. So the way we do that is we choose an x value. And what I like to do is choose x as 0 if I can. For example, and my example went off the page there. So if I go back to my original, what I've completed, and I substitute 0 in for x. So y is equal to 0 minus 1 squared plus 2. Okay. And so then y is equal to negative 1 squared is positive 1 plus 2 is 3. So 0, 3 is one of my points that's on my parabola. So I go ahead and graph that, 0, 3. Now, I also told you that a parabola is completely symmetrical. So if it's 0, 3, I think about how far to the left did I have to travel from my vertex. I traveled 1. So my next point, my third point, is I'm going to travel 1 to the right. Here I traveled 1 to the left, so now I'm going to travel 1 to the right, still up 3. And now I have my 3 points. I've got this point in red, the green point, and then the red point. And I can kind of create my graph from that. Okay, the axis of symmetry is x equals 1. I told you that up here. It opens upward. Okay, that's a lot. Make sure you have this example in your notes. Okay, next example. All right, so this is B. So we have x is equal, or I'm sorry, y is equal to negative x squared minus 4 minus 3. We're going to take our negative 3 away and just focus here on completing the square with the x's. All right, this is a little different. And your book actually does this a little differently. So when you're checking it in your solutions manual, it's going to have a little bit different order. But you'll be able to see it's doing relatively the same thing. But I like to do it this way. I feel like it's less complicated. But, you can make that decision. So because I need this x squared to be positive, I need to factor out my negative here. So I just factor it out of my parentheses, right? So I factor the negative out of the negative x squared and I get an x squared. I factor the negative out of my negative 4 and I get positive 4x. Okay, so now I have that and then my minus 3 over here. So that says complete the square, factor out the negative. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and complete our squares. So we have our positive 4x divided by 2, square it, plus 4. Okay, so if we just look here at the little brown, x squared plus 4x plus 4. That should make a lot of sense to you. Now, here's a little trick, right? So I've added 4, so I think, and now I have to do something over here to balance it, right? And so in the last example, where did I have that? The last example here, I added a 1 and I subtracted a 1. So it balanced it. Now I'm coming over here. It looks like I add a 4. Why am I adding a 4 again? Okay, let's look at this. This negative is distributed to everything inside my parentheses. So that means I've actually subtracted a 4. Do you see that? So it actually is like a negative 4 here. And because there's a negative 4 here, I have to add a 4 to the brown. So I have my net positive 4 minus 3. Okay, and you can kind of see I've neutralized it because it's a negative 4, so I have to add a 4. That's how I've neutralized it. Okay, so simplifying, I have in green, y is equal to negative, parentheses, x plus 2, close parentheses, squared, okay, plus 1. 4 minus 3. All right, it's going to open downwards because I have a negative, okay? My vertex here. Okay, this is a positive. Remember, my formula says that it has to be a negative. So how did I come up with that? It's minus a negative 2. Okay, so because I can rewrite or rethink about that positive 2 as minus a negative, that's how I know my vertex is negative 1. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and graph that. So negative 2, 1. I have to find my other points. So I choose x equals 0 to find another point. So I plug it in. Y equals negative 0 plus 2 squared plus 1. Y is equal to negative 4, because I've got my negative here. I have 2 squared is 4, so negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. So my new point is 0, negative 3. So right here, 0, negative 3 is my second point. I know it's symmetrical, so I have to count 2 over and down 3. So that means from here, I can go 2 over and down 3. So that's my last point. And I can draw my graph, and those do have arrows on the end. It's just kind of coming into everything else. Okay, so it's opening downward. My axis of symmetry is x equals negative 2, right there. And a lot of times you might see something like that. That's the axis of symmetry. Okay, friends, this is not for the faint of heart, but you can do this, okay? We've done a lot of completing the square. You're really good at it. And so now you can learn this new thing, graphing the parabola using completing the square, and then finding all the parts of it. And when you do this, ACTs and things like that really help. It makes a lot of sense, because sometimes in the ACTs, they give you a quadratic equation, and they say which graph equals that quadratic equation. And they're not even looking for you to actually know how to graph it. They're looking for you to know which direction it goes in, or what's the vertex. Okay, and so that's what this is really helpful to do too. All right, email, text if you have any questions. You're doing 4 lessons this week, and then we have a break week, right? And then I'll talk to you in a couple weeks. Have a good one. Happy Easter.